1 minute ago, chaos erupted in Britain as Prime Minister Keir Starmer was dramatically arrested inside a courtroom, leaving the nation frozen in disbelief. The man who stood at the helm of the United Kingdom, once seen as a symbol of authority and reform, is now at the centre of a political and legal firestorm that no one saw coming. Cameras captured the moment, news outlets broke into live coverage, and social media exploded into a frenzy of shock, outrage and confusion. It wasn't a rumour nor a staged political stunt. It was it was real, raw and happening in front of the entire nation's eyes. The United Kingdom has entered uncharted territory, and what unfolded in that courtroom today could redefine the future of British politics forever. The tension inside the courtroom had been building for days, but no one could have predicted the storm that would strike this morning. Keir Starmer, once calm and confident as he faced a wave of legal scrutiny, suddenly found himself surrounded by officers as the judge's final words echoed through the chamber. The moment was surreal. The sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom being arrested in front of journalists, legal experts and stunned members of the public. Gasps filled the air, cameras flashed without pause, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed off the courtroom walls. What had begun as a routine legal proceeding instantly turned into one of the most extraordinary moments in modern British history. Eyewitnesses described a scene of disbelief. Starmer, who had moments earlier been standing at the witness stand, appeared composed yet visibly strained as law enforcement officers stepped forward. The courtroom, packed beyond capacity, erupted into whispers and shouts as the order was executed. "This can't be real," one observer muttered, while others reached for their phones to capture the unfolding chaos. Security personnel moved quickly, clearing pathways and restraining anyone attempting to push closer. Within seconds, Starmer was placed in custody and led through a secure side exit away from the blinding flashes of the press cameras. Outside, the scene was no less chaotic. Crowds had gathered early in the morning, anticipating an important verdict. But none expected the country's leader to be taken away in handcuffs. As news of the arrest spread, the crowd's reaction shifted from confusion to outrage. Some screamed in disbelief, others chanted in anger, and a few wept openly, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The air buzzed with questions. Why was he arrested? What charges had been brought against him? Was this an act of justice or political revenge? For many, it was too sudden, too shocking to comprehend. Within minutes, major news outlets across Britain broke the story. Television channels cut from scheduled programming to live coverage outside the courthouse, their reporters barely able to keep up with the frenzy. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of speculation. Hashtags like Starmer arrest and Britain in shock trended within minutes. Commentators, journalists and ordinary citizens poured into the digital space, each offering their own version of events. Some claimed the arrest was tied to legal investigations long whispered about behind closed doors, while others insisted it was a politically motivated move meant to silence opposition. The truth, at that moment, was buried under a flood of panic and confusion. In Westminster, a parliament was thrown into chaos. MPs scrambled for information, their phones lighting up with urgent messages and breaking alerts. Government aides rushed between offices trying to confirm the unbelievable, that the Prime Minister had indeed been arrested mid-trial. The opposition benches buzzed with speculation. Some MPs reportedly shouted across the chamber, demanding an emergency statement from the Home Secretary. The Speaker was forced to call for order as voices clashed, turning the chamber into a storm of accusation and disbelief. Meanwhile, Downing Street remained silent. Officials refused to issue immediate comments, fueling even more uncertainty. Without a clear statement, rumours multiplied, some suggesting that Starmer's arrest was linked to alleged breaches of ministerial conduct, others claiming it involved undisclosed evidence submitted to the court earlier that morning. The lack of clarity only heightened the sense of national panic. Britain was no longer just watching a political scandal. It was witnessing a full-blown crisis unfold in real time. Eyewitness footage from outside the courthouse began circulating online, showing Starmer escorted by officers through a secure passageway, his face expressionless yet tense. The images were soon replayed on every major network, accompanied by breaking news graphics and urgent headlines. The visual alone, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in police custody, was enough to send shockwaves through the world. This was not a scandal that could be spun or denied. It was visible, undeniable, and historic. Analysts began comparing the moment to some of Britain's darkest political hours, calling it unprecedented in modern democracy. Even veteran political reporters admitted they had never seen anything like it. The questions came thick and fast. What happens now? Who leads the country in his absence? Could this trigger a government collapse? The sense of unease was overwhelming. For supporters of Starmer, it was a nightmare. For his critics, it was vindication. For everyone else, it was the moment the ground beneath British politics began to shake. Internationally, the reaction was swift. American and European networks interrupted regular programming to cover the arrest. World leaders were briefed by their embassies, trying to assess how this would affect diplomatic relations and the stability of the UK government. The world's oldest democracy had suddenly become the scene of a political drama that no one could ignore. Some commentators abroad praised Britain's commitment to the rule of law, noting that even a prime minister was not immune to justice. Others, however, warned that the optics of such an arrest could weaken Britain's global standing, raising doubts about its leadership and stability at a time of international uncertainty. As night fell, London remained restless. Crowds continued to gather outside the courthouse and Downing Street, chanting slogans, waving flags, and demanding answers. Police presence grew heavier, tensions escalated. For many citizens, the image of Starmer being led away in handcuffs had already burned itself into history, a symbol of a nation at a crossroads, torn between law, politics, and the truth. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The hours following Keir Starmer's arrest were some of the most chaotic Britain had seen in decades. What had begun as a courtroom shock quickly spiralled into a full-blown national crisis. By midday, every news channel, every radio broadcast, and every online feed was dominated by one story: the arrest of the Prime Minister. Journalists raced to uncover the truth. Political insiders whispered of betrayal. And the British public was left trying to comprehend how their leader, once hailed as a man of law and justice, could be escorted away in police custody. The heart of London pulsed with uncertainty. The usually composed city now buzzed with tension, confusion, and disbelief. It was as though the nation had been thrown into a storm without warning. At Westminster, the atmosphere was electric and uneasy. Ministers were seen rushing through corridors, phones pressed to their ears, their faces pale with disbelief. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors as senior officials tried to determine who would take charge in Starmer's absence. The Cabinet Office issued a brief, cautious statement confirming that the Prime Minister is currently cooperating with lawful procedures, but offered no further detail. That single line only deepened the mystery. Across Parliament, opposition MPs seized on the silence, calling for immediate transparency. Demands for an emergency session grew louder by the hour as speculation ran wild about the nature of the charges. Some claimed it was connected to government contracts. Others whispered about undisclosed documents or political interference. None of it was confirmed, but every theory added fuel to the fire. As confusion spread, public opinion fractured sharply. Outside government buildings, protesters gathered in the thousands. Some carried placards defending Starmer, shouting that he was a victim of a political trap. Others demanded his resignation, chanting, "No one is above the law." The clash of voices echoed through Whitehall, a symbol of the deep divide tearing through the country. Police formed barricades to prevent clashes as tensions mounted. News helicopters hovered above, broadcasting live images of a capital city gripped by turmoil. Every corner of Britain felt the tremors. From pubs in Manchester to offices in Birmingham and homes in Edinburgh, conversations revolved around a single question: how could this happen to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Across the media landscape, the tone was grim. Commentators dissected every frame of the footage showing Starmer's arrest, pointing out details, facial expressions, and gestures. Legal experts debated whether due process had been followed, while political analysts speculated about the power vacuum that might follow. Was this the beginning of a constitutional crisis? Could the Labour government survive such a devastating blow? The questions multiplied faster than answers could arrive. In the absence of clarity, rumour became fact and speculation became headline. Every passing hour brought a new twist, and every newscast seemed to carry a different version of events. Meanwhile, inside police headquarters, sources reported that Starmer was being questioned under strict security. Details were scarce, but leaks began to surface, hinting that the matter involved serious allegations tied to official misconduct. None of it was confirmed, yet the gravity of the situation was unmistakable. The idea that Britain's sitting Prime Minister was being interrogated under caution sent shockwaves through institutions that had long prided themselves on stability and order. It was an image few could ever have imagined, the country's top leader facing the very legal system he once upheld as a prosecutor. In the international arena, allies and rivals watched with fascination and unease. Statements of concern poured in from Washington, Brussels and Berlin. The European press ran headlines suggesting the UK was facing a political meltdown. American broadcasters called it the most extraordinary event in modern British democracy. The pound dropped sharply in early trading, reflecting market fears about leadership instability. Investors sought clarity from a government that suddenly seemed leaderless. The opposition demanded that the Deputy Prime Minister step forward and address the nation. But even that office appeared paralysed by uncertainty. Britain, for all its historic resilience, was standing on a knife's edge. By evening, the streets of London glowed under flashing lights and restless voices. Parliament Square had turned into a sea of protesters, police and journalists. Chants echoed through the night, some calling for justice, others demanding freedom for Starmer. Flares lit up the sky as tension threatened to boil over into unrest. The government responded by increasing security presence across major cities, warning citizens to remain calm and trust the process. But trust was already in short supply. Many saw the arrest as proof of corruption and decay within the political system, while others believed it was a desperate attempt to maintain integrity by holding even the most powerful accountable. Inside the Labour Party, panic began to take root. Senior members argued over how to respond, torn between loyalty and survival. Some urged unity, insisting that the truth would clear Starmer's name. Others called for a temporary leadership transition to preserve stability. The divide within the party mirrored the divide in the country, confusion, fear and anger competing for dominance. Confidential messages leaked to the press revealed internal chaos, with aides accusing each other of mishandling information. Every hour that passed without answers deepened the sense of crisis. As night stretched into early morning, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. Britain found itself in a rare moment of collective silence, a pause between disbelief and reckoning. The image of Keir Starmer, handcuffed and escorted by police, played on screens again and again, each replay cementing its place in history. The people demanded answers, the press demanded transparency, and the government seemed frozen in response. Across every corner of the nation, from Parliament to the high streets, one truth became painfully clear. Britain was no longer watching a political scandal, it was living through a national reckoning. The country had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And whatever came next would change everything. By the following morning, the shockwaves from Keir Starmer's arrest had spread far beyond Westminster. What began as a single courtroom moment had grown into a national reckoning, pulling every institution, political, legal and social, into its orbit. Newspapers across the country carried identical front-page headlines. Prime Minister in custody. The phrase alone was enough to unsettle a public already weary from political scandals and economic strain. Every cafe, workplace and household seemed caught in the same uneasy conversation. What happens now? Could a sitting Prime Minister truly face criminal charges, and what did that mean for the government, the Labour Party and Britain's international standing? The air felt heavier, charged with fear and fascination, as the country watched events unfold in real time. Downing Street, once a symbol of control and authority, now looked like the eye of a storm. Security around Number 10 was visibly tightened. with armed officers stationed at every corner and news vans camped outside. The Deputy Prime Minister, pressed by journalists for answers, issued a short and carefully worded statement acknowledging the gravity of the situation and urging the public to trust in the rule of law, yet the lack of detail only intensified the confusion. Inside government offices, officials worked around the clock, drafting contingency plans for a temporary leadership transfer, for emergency cabinet meetings, and even for the possibility of a snap election if Starmer was unable to resume his duties. The Labour Party, once unified under his leadership, had fractured overnight. Ministers loyal to Starmer called for calm, insisting he would be cleared, while others quietly began preparing for his potential resignation. In Parliament, the atmosphere was combustible. When the House convened for an emergency session, the chamber was filled to capacity. The Speaker struggled to maintain order as MPs from all parties shouted over one another. The opposition benches demanded a full disclosure of the charges, accusing the government of hiding crucial information. Several MPs stood up, their voices shaking with anger, calling for an immediate suspension of Starmer's office. The Home Secretary faced relentless questioning, offering only brief assurances that lawful procedures are being followed with full transparency. Her words did little to calm the storm. The spectacle was broadcast live and millions watched as the political class turned on itself. The divide between government and opposition had never seemed wider, and the British public could feel the weight of a system straining under its own uncertainty. Outside the walls of power, public anger boiled. London, Manchester and Liverpool all saw massive gatherings. By midday, tens of thousands took to the streets, some demanding answers, others demanding justice. Union Jack flags waved alongside protest signs reading "Truth for Britain" and "Justice or Revenge." Police lines stretched across major intersections as chants and flares filled the air. Social media, already flooded with conspiracy theories and unverified claims, became a battleground of narratives. Some posts claimed the arrest was part of an internal government plot. Others insisted it was an international scandal waiting to erupt. No one knew what to believe anymore, and that uncertainty gave rise to something even more dangerous: fear. Amid the chaos, global attention intensified. The White House issued a statement expressing concern for stability in the United Kingdom, while leaders from the European Union called for transparency and due process. Markets trembled, the pound continued to fall, and investors began pulling assets from London's financial hub. The image of a once stable Britain, now embroiled in internal crisis, dominated international headlines. Commentators across the Atlantic debated whether this could mark the end of Starmer's political career or the beginning of something far darker, a breakdown in the UK's political order. Even foreign diplomats stationed in London reported unprecedented levels of tension, describing the mood as volatile and unpredictable. Meanwhile, inside police custody, the situation remained shrouded in secrecy. Reports suggested that Starmer had undergone hours of questioning, his legal team working tirelessly to secure a temporary release. Sources claimed that he remained calm, occasionally asking for updates from his advisors, but gave no public statements. The press, desperate for information, began circling every possible lead. Late-night reports hinted that sealed evidence had been presented to the court just hours before the arrest. Documents that allegedly linked Starmer to procedural violations during his time as Labour leader. None of it was officially confirmed, but the leaks were enough to keep the country on edge. Every headline felt heavier, every update more explosive than the last. Back in Westminster, the sense of loyalty within Starmer's cabinet began to fracture further. Whispers of resignation started to circulate among senior ministers, with some considering breaking ranks and calling for new leadership. Opposition leaders seized on the disarray, portraying it as proof of a government in collapse. Emergency meetings were held late into the night, but unity seemed impossible. For every minister who defended Starmer's integrity, another argued that the government could not function under such uncertainty. By the end of the day, it was clear that even those closest to the Prime Minister were beginning to lose faith. In the streets, exhaustion began to mix with anger. The protests had stretched into their second night, with crowds refusing to disperse. Fires were lit, windows smashed, and police clashed with demonstrators outside government offices. The air was thick with frustration and disbelief. For many Britons, it no longer mattered whether Starmer was guilty or innocent. What mattered was that the government had lost control. The country, once a beacon of political stability, was now teetering on the edge of chaos. Broadcasters compared the unrest to scenes not witnessed in decades. The United Kingdom, it seemed, had entered a new and uncertain era, one where law, power and politics collided in the harsh light of public scrutiny. As midnight had approached, the once bustling streets of Westminster stood littered with debris and echoes of unrest. The city that symbolised power now mirrored a nation in turmoil, shaken, divided, and waiting for answers that refused to come. Inside every home, television screens glowed with the same haunting image: Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, in police custody. It was an image no one could forget, and one that promised the story was far from over.